Eadig and welcome back to my channel. I'm super excited because I am sharing with you guys my entire Book of Shadows journey. I'm buying a new Book of Shadows and I'm going to be shopping for it with you, as well as unboxing it and doing all the fun stuff with my Book of Shadows. So this is going to be an entire series for you, and this first video is going to be what you should know about creating your Book of Shadows, as well as some tips for you. So Book of Shadows, of course, is a book of spells, and it's a personal record of your spells that have actually worked for you. It's also commonly known as a grimoire, which stems from the Old French word meaning grammar, and some grimoires you may have heard of are the Key of Solomon, the Book of Abramelin the Mage, and the Lemegeton, which were made during the Renaissance and medieval periods. So for your Book of Shadows, it's a record of your own personal spells that have worked for you and you've experimented with. It's not just a notebook. So you can have a corresponding notebook of spells that you're working on currently and things that you kind of notice in your spells, like what you want to add to it, what's worked for you and what hasn't, that sort of thing. So that's like a separate notebook that you could have as a correspondence. Your Book of Shadows, though, is everything that you've experimented with and everything that has actually worked for you. That's a really important distinction, because it's not just something that you like scribble notes and things like that in. It's actually a book of spells that have actually worked for you. And with that said, your book is for you and for you alone. It's not something for you to kind of have in high traffic areas and have people like look through and like dabble in and stuff like that. It's literally for you. You don't want random people just coming to your book and saying, oh my god, what's this? I'm just gonna go through it and like look through your magic and stuff like that. It's specifically for you and for your craft. So you want to be able to keep it hidden and separate and protected as well. So if you want to protect your book, you can add some charms to it. You can add like a charm in a leaflet or something, just so that it has an extra set of protection, so that random people just don't come across it and just open it and just do things with it. There's nothing worse than like having that friend that comes over and, you know, sharing your Book of Shadows with them, and then every time they come over, they're literally going through your Book of Shadows without your permission. Like, you don't want that to happen. So adding those extra charms can definitely help. When you're also like opening your Book of Shadows, you kind of want a page that says who this belongs to. This book belongs to Eadig. And maybe having an introduction after that and saying, this book is for this specific type of magic that I'm working through and trying for myself. That sort of thing. Just that you kind of like have a goal for yourself with your Book of Shadows as well. And you can also add like a little beware message for any trespassers. Anyone that goes beyond this page, beware, because this could happen to you. That sort of thing. That can also just like deter people from just going through your Book of Shadows if they see that. Because, you know, once someone sees like, oh, I'm gonna get a slap in the hand if I go through this, like they're definitely not gonna mess with it as much as they would if they just like went through it without that. So you definitely want like something, just like a little added like boost of, just don't touch me, don't touch this book, because you never know what's gonna happen to you if you do. You've been warned, you know, that sort of thing. You know, if you put a warning in a book and something happens to someone, you can always just say, I mean, you were warned not to touch it, and you did, so what am I supposed to do about that? So with that added charm of protection and also the beware message, you also want to have some like hidden elements in your book. You want to have maybe a witchy language or a different language. You could maybe use Latin or Old English, Old Norse even if you know it. Something so that if someone comes across it, they're not necessarily going to know what it is or what it's for or what it says. You might not just want random people to see your magic if they do come across it. So that's why a lot of like witches in the olden days would add alchemical symbols as well as planetary symbols and work with different ciphers and like everything, just that people that came across it just didn't know what it was or couldn't like decipher it. So you can add like a magical alphabet, like the Theban alphabet, which is also called the witch's alphabet. It's one of my favorites because it looks the witchiest. You can add the angelic script, the Malachim alphabet, the pictorial alphabet, anything like that. You could also have an extra element of secrecy by having invisible ink. I had invisible ink once to like, you know, surprise a friend with a card and gave them like a black light to look through it, and it was like the coolest thing ever. So you want to have like really cool fun elements to your Book of Shadows, and you want to be able to protect it as well. And that just can add like a new fun element to it by having invisible ink and having magical alphabets as well. You also want to be able to have an unlined book. I definitely prefer unlined books because it gives me a sort of freedom that a lined book doesn't. If you're someone that likes to make lists in your Book of Shadows and you want to have like more of a controlled Book of Shadows, like that's totally fine. Like go for the lined book if you want to. I personally prefer unlined books because it just gives me that freedom and I can literally add different elements to it. I can add stickers, I can add so many different things. The script doesn't have to be in one like little section. I can put it on the margins, I can put it on like around, make a circle of like different like scripts and stuff like that. I have all of that freedom for myself when I have an unlined book. And I'm gonna be sharing with you guys where I got my unlined book, so definitely stay tuned for more videos in this series because I'm excited to share them with you. Also, make sure you have enough pages in your Book of Shadows in order to have all of your spells in one place. I personally am one of those people that kind of does the same spells over and over again, or like does little variations, but kind of like I'm okay when it comes to having enough pages because I won't run out probably. But for someone that likes to experiment and do a bunch of different types of spells, whether it's potions, whether it's making sigils, anything like that, then you really want to have that space. You want to be able to have a book of like 300 pages where you'll be good for a while, where you can actually have all of your spells in one place. And you can also have extra books of shadows. You can have one book of shadows for a certain type of magic and another book of shadows for another type of magic. It's totally up to you. But I think it's much better to have everything in one place. But if you wanted to have like one book of shadows for planetary magic and another book of shadows for herbal magic, totally fine, like do you. It's just really important to be able to have like whatever spells you've experimented with in one place. Also, with that said, your book doesn't have to have the witchy aesthetic. I mean, the witchy aesthetic is freaking awesome. I love it. Everyone loves it. That's what draws people to witchcraft. But if you wanted to make a listicle and if you wanted to do like more of a bullet journal style, or if you don't really have that much of an artistic eye and you just want somewhere to put your spells, do that. You do not have to have the witchy aesthetic. And I know that kind of deters some people from making a Book of Shadows because they wonder, oh my God, what if my Book of Shadows doesn't have that aesthetic? Like, is it really a Book of Shadows? Yes, a Book of Shadows is a book of spells. A grimoire is a book of spells. Just because you don't have like the crazy like artistic witchy moons and herbs and stuff like that doesn't mean that like it's not a grimoire or a Book of Shadows. It is your personal book of spells. So if you don't have that witchy aesthetic, it's fine because it's still a representation of your personal magic, and that is enough for you in creating your Book of Shadows. I will be sharing with you guys like some elements that I add to my Book of Shadows in my next video, so that if you don't have like an eye for drawing or anything like that, you can easily make a Book of Shadows in a different way. You can have like different things for your Book of Shadows. So I will be showing you guys how to do that in my next episodes. So you should also map out your Book of Shadows in pencil before you do anything else, because there's nothing worse than like doing your whole thing and working through stuff, writing everything in pen and realizing you made a mistake. So you either have to like white it out or cross it out or kind of just rip out the page. Like, you don't want to rip out any pages of your Book of Shadows. You want to be able to have a nice, smooth, clean Book of Shadows. So there's nothing worse than having to rip out pages or having to like white out anything. So make sure that you draw, you paint, you do other things on other pages, like maybe just like a scrap page of something just to test it out and see if it works out first. Then work on your Book of Shadows after you've done a little bit of practice before that. Or trace everything out in your Book of Shadows with pencil first so that you can at least erase whatever mistakes that you make. Again, there's nothing worse than having to rip out pages. And last but not least, if for any reason you cannot continue your craft, you should definitely think about passing on your Book of Shadows to someone that's going to appreciate it. Whether or not it's another witch, someone in your coven, someone in your family that practices witchcraft or is interested in it, your children, anything like that. Because you don't want it just to like fly out in the wind and like random people to find it. You want to be able to pass it on to someone that can really appreciate the magic that you've created and really work with it in their own personal craft. You want to be able to pass on the knowledge that you have to someone that can really, really appreciate it. So that's all I have for you guys today. I hope this helped in your Book of Shadows journeys. Definitely stay tuned for my next Book of Shadows videos where I do a little bit of shopping, do an unboxing, and show you guys what's next in my Book of Shadows journey, how I map out my Book of Shadows. So definitely stay tuned for that. I'm so excited to share that with you guys, and I'll see you next time.